All right, Rabosai, good evening. Let us begin. So we have a very exciting shir ahead of us tonight. Really a couple of passages. We're going to spend the first part of the shir. Are there enough sheets, by the way, on the bima still? Baron, we're good there? Excellent. Okay, well, say anyone who's up here, there are Makomos, also copies of Mishnah Berurah if you need, and also by the Bima. So what Emer Tashem are going to accomplish over the course of this evening is really kind of split our shir into two parts. You can see Roman numeral number 1 is really a continuation of the topic that we began last week, namely the discussion about wringing out liquid absorbed in fabric. So we went through a variety of different cases last week, and we will continue Emer Tashem to go through those cases this week as well. And then our goal, the stated goal for this evening, is to finish Siman Shin Beis. But we'll see, Emer Hashem, how close we get to that stated goal. So let's begin. First of all, we of course dedicate our learning in the zechus of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael during this incredibly overwhelming time with over 160 rockets fired in Eretz Yisrael. You know, if you saw the videos, the session in the Knesset was suspended as all of the ministers were taken to the Mamad, to the safe rooms. Capital of Am Yisrael was under attack as well. So we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, we hope in the merit of our Tfilos, that Emir Tashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu should keep our brothers and sisters of Eretz Yisrael safe. And Emir Tashem, the day should come when Am Yisrael could reside securely in Eretz Yisrael, and the nations of the world recognize our uncontestable right to our land, to every part of our land. And Me'er Hashem, the day come when all of us are there together with Mashiach and with the Beis HaMikdash. Me'er Rabbi Yameinu. Well, so with that, let us begin. Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa number 1 says as follows: Asr lahartiv b'Shabbos Yom Tov Sfok. So now we come to the interesting discussion about the use of a sponge on Shabbos. So remember, when it comes to discussions, I don't remember, somebody mentioned this to me after the shir, or maybe it was, I think it was Manny, mentioned this to me maybe 2 weeks ago, that a lot of these cases that we're bringing up really actually bring up a number of Hilchos Shabbos shilos, right? So I just want to point out that in a lot of these cases, we're looking at these particular situations through the lens of Melaben, of Kibbutz, because that is our stated topic. But for example, when it comes to doing dishes on Shabbos, so doing dishes on Shabbos could really involve a whole variety of different things. If you're using hot water, it could involve an issue chas v'shalom of bishul. If you're going ahead and cleaning dishes, you don't need, it could involve an issue of hachana, preparation. So when we deal with some of these example cases, we're not dealing with every single aspect of the case. So I just want to point out over here, so Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa discusses the use of a sponge on Shabbos. I'm cleaning my dishes with cold water. I need the dishes. Can I use a sponge? So Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa says that it is asr. He says, asr la'artiv b'Shabbos of Yom Tov Sfog o matlis, v'asr l'nakos bohem. Now I will say, here's what's interesting. We could talk this out, and here's the beauty of our limud, is because the way we learn these halachas is by going through the background and understanding the intellectual underpinnings. We understand. Now, on one hand, you could say that a sponge should be permitted to use in water. Why? Because the absorption of water in a sponge can be considered derech lichluch. Derech lichluch. On the other hand, I will say, here's the issue, and this is fascinating. The problem with the sponge is actually not the Melaben issue. The problem of the sponge is a mefarik issue, a dosh issue. Remember again, as we discussed in last week's shir, the act of squeezing out water could be one of two potential malachas. It could be Melaben, right, the act of kibbutz, the act of laundering, but it could also be the malacha of mefarik or dosh, which means to extract something which is absorbed in something else. Remember again, how do you know when it's Melaben and when it's dosh? What does that depend on? Excellent. Do you want the liquid or not? If you don't care about the liquid, you just care about cleaning the garment, then that's kibbutz. But if you actually want the liquid, then it's an issue of dash. Here's what's fascinating in halacha. When you use the sponge, I will say, do you want the liquid? Absolutely you do. Meaning, remember again, it's the moisture in the sponge. By the way, this is like one-stop shopping. You get halacha, cleaning tips, everything you need. Right? I will say, when you use the sponge, the whole chap is you want the moisture in the sponge because it's the moisture in the sponge that helps the sponge be an effective cleaning instrument. Right? Otherwise, again, you would just use a rag. So in halacha, I want the liquid to come out of the sponge. I want the liquid from the sponge. So because the actually Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa writes that halacha l'maisa, one cannot use the sponge on Shabbos as it is an issue of mefarik. So I'm just pointing out over here, not really an issue of mechabes, but an issue of mafarik, an issue of dash. Another example. Shmir Shabbos also writes in number 2. We'll say now here, he discusses the interesting, if you look at just the underlying lines, he writes, L'umasos, mutter lehishtamesh lenikoy hakelim b'motzim mechomer sintati hamyuchadim lakach. So we'll say now today you could purchase something called a Shabbos dish brush. So what's a Shabbos dish brush? Well, besides costing 10 times the amount of a regular dish brush, right, and having 15 hashgachas on it, interestingly enough, it does go ahead and serve a particular purpose. So Shmir Shabbos Chosa says as follows. So you'll say a regular dish brush, as we will discuss, cannot be used on Shabbos. We'll discuss why that is in just a moment. But he says, if you have a dish brush, let's talk about, let me read it actually, and then he says, L'umazos, you could use a brush that first of all has synthetic fibers. See, let's talk about the general issue with using a regular dish brush. The problem we'll say is one of what? One of schita, because the water gets absorbed in the bristles, and really not just in the bristles, or even if not as much in the bristles, between the bristles. And therefore, ultimately, again, when you utilize that dish brush, you're extracting the liquid. Again, remember, lav dafka that it's going to be mefarek, that's going to be mechabes. But so therefore, Shmir Shabbos Kilchos says, if you use a Shabbos dish brush, which essentially is a dish brush that is synthetic material, therefore the bristles themselves are non-absorbent, and the bristles are spaced. So what distinguishes a Shabbos dish brush from your vachadik dish brush, from your weekday dish brush, is the spacing of the bristles. Because since the bristles are spaced, therefore what? There's no water that effectively gets trapped in between them. So because there's no water that gets trapped in between them, therefore halacha lemaisa, there's no quote-unquote extraction of liquid. He goes on, in Tesvav, the next section, he says, Muta lishtamish bevaresha shasuya chomer sintati she'ein sa'aroset zefufos zulazu. So Shmir Shabbos Kilchos says that if you have a dish brush that A has non-absorbent bristles, that's why he uses lotion of synthetic material, and number 2, the bristles, is that the right word? The bristles? Yeah. Right? The bristles themselves are distanced so that there's no water trapped in between the bristles, then halacha l'maisa, that is suitable for use on Shabbos. Now, if you take a look at the bottom footnote in number 2, he writes, "T'chol davar she'ena boleah, ve'enav chol mishtane machmas hamayim hanichsapim, ve'gam hachalolim shebein saros hamireshes nikarim le'ayin, harei ze dome l'tzinor dak shel gumi shemark ben hamayim." So since your Shlomo Zalman says, as long as the cleaning utensil does not become, swollen is the wrong word. I'm sorry? Saturated, thank you. Does not become saturated and therefore enlarged with water, which is referring to a sponge. And ultimately, again, the bristles are large enough, or distanced enough, so that water is not getting actively trapped in between the bristles. Halacha l'maisa does not pose a mechabis, it does not pose a mechabis or a schita problem. So what happened is Shlomo Zalman says, because essentially, even if there is some water there, that water is not considered to be absorbed by the bristles. He compares it to water sitting inside of a pipe. Okay, so both say, so therefore again, if in number 1, Shmir Shabbos Kilchos is telling us you can't use a sponge, but interestingly enough, the issue of a sponge is not one of mechabes. The issue of a sponge is one of mefarek, because you want the liquid. You are permitted to use your Shabbos dish brush. And again, the criteria for being a Shabbos-friendly dish brush is non-absorbent bristles, synthetic material bristles, and bristles spaced so that water is not getting absorbed in between the bristles. Interesting enough, although it's not our topic, but I feel compelled to bring it down over here, this happens to get into the discussion regarding brushing one's teeth on Shabbos. So if you take a look at number 3, Rav Moshe discusses this Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Yud Beis Lenakos Shinayim B'Shabbos V'Yom Tov. So this is the tshuva over here. Rav Moshe says, are you allowed to brush your teeth on Shabbos and Yom Tov? So Rav Moshe writes, B'Davar Lenakos Shinayim B'Shabbos Yom Tov, in toothpaste, that's Hebrew, right? Toothpaste, right? Can you go ahead and use, although in modern Hebrew I think they call it Mishchas Shinayim, right? But again, toothpaste, so can you use toothpaste on Shabbos, Mishchas Shinayim, Pashat She'asur Shemachik. So we'll say, again, like I said, there's a lot of other issues that's often brought up in these discussions. For example, the use of toothpaste, I will say, is asur on Shabbos for a totally different reason. you cannot take a solid mass and smooth it out on Shabbos. This doesn't, of course, apply to things that you're eating, but you can't in general. The same reason I can't use hand soap, right? I can't go and take something and actively smooth it out. So I can't take toothpaste and smooth it out. That's memachik. Or below toothpaste, b'mavresha samyuchal hazeh, mutter shehu kimo rechitzas shar iver echad aval yishav rabbatonei. So, also interestingly enough, so when it comes to brushing teeth, there's a variety of different issues involved. Number one is the smoothing out of the toothpaste. That's memachik. Number two is the potential of causing your gums to bleed. Right? It's also like causing bleeding on Shabbos is an actual issue of shchita. There's another discussion about breaking the bristles on the toothbrush itself. Now, interestingly enough, Rav Moshe doesn't really bring up the issue with the gums. Rav Moshe is focusing on you can't use toothpaste because it's memachik. And he said, however, you can go ahead and brush your teeth with the brush. He says that's not a problem, but one second. Vim habrosh tov shelo lilachich b'mayim kodem hanikui mechashash schita b'seyar. But Rav Moshe says you can't wet the brush. You can't wet the brush. See, interestingly, what Rav Moshe would allow you to do on Shabbos is to gently brush your teeth with a dry brush. A dry brush. Can't use toothpaste. You could use a dry brush on Shabbos. V'achar hanikui. Now, I will say now, by the way, it gets even better. V'achar hanikui yirchatz es lo yirchatz es habrush. Avshlo b'shivshuv she'en sham schita mishum she'en lo tzarach. Listen to this. We'll say, but Rav Moshe says, by the way, after you use the brush, you can't clean it. Why can't you clean it, Rav Ozai? Why not? Because the act of cleaning, says Rav Moshe, is hachana. So besides, meaning even if you're not going to shake it out, let's say you're just going to brush it and put it back, so there's nothing being shaken out, so there's no schita, it's an act of hachana. So Rav Moshe says, you can't use toothpaste because it's memachik. You cannot go ahead and wet the brush because it's an issue of schita, right? And you can't wash the brush out. So the most you could do is use a dry brush, and even then you can't wash it out afterwards because you run into an issue, even if you don't run into an issue of schita, ultimately, again, you run into an issue of hachana. So Rav Moshe, one word, scope, right? One word, right? Mouthwash. Again, many halachic problems involved with brushing one's teeth on Shabbos. And therefore, Allah Moshe would say, use mouthwash. Now, I will point out, there are poskim who disagree with Rav Moshe, and there are poskim who allow for toothbrushing on Shabbos. People often throw around Rabbi Soloveitchik's name, but I think it's being misquoted, and I don't know if the Rav actually held that way. But what I did put for you over here on the last page of the Mari Makomos is Rav Eliezer Melaben. We like to quote often Rav Melaben, right? From Melaben, he comes through with pets, he comes through with toothbrushing. So again, we're not going to go through this together, but Rav Melaben, who's Rosh Yeshiva of Har Bracha, is matir brushing teeth on Shabbos, is matir brushing teeth on Shabbos. But I will say, but again, as I always say, it's always important not to posek shop, because Melamed also holds that every moment you live outside of Eretz Yisrael, you're in an active state of sin. So if you're going to go ahead and hold like by toothbrushing, it's kedai to pack your bags and make aliyah as well, which is again, it's a wonderful thing. So again, but you'll look at it on your own. It's not our topic. It's not really our topic. Again, I'm just bringing it in because the discussion of extracting liquid out of the bristles, which happens to come by the dishbrush, does come up by toothbrushes as well. But again, Shavuos is coming. It's kedai to review. You could take a look at this piece from Rav Melamed. It's beautifully written. The footnote is where he describes all of the svaras. Good. So we'll say that brings us now to number 5. We're making good movement over here. So we'll say number 5. The Archos Shabbos bring down a very interesting case, and he speaks about again. So 4 is Pinini Halacha. So the source was too big. I just put the Pinini Halacha, which is Rav Melamed, on the last page of your source sheet. That's all. I'm sorry. I should have put number 4 back there as well. So the Archos Shabbos writes as follows. Well, listen to this interesting case. Mi shenirtavu garbav b'toch kidei halicha. Well, listen to this case. It's Shabbos and it's pouring. I think about said, when did we learn it? Was it 2 weeks ago? Right? Not this past year, but the week before. When we were talking, the first time we talked about the Shulchan Aruch Harav and getting clothing wet, I think it poured that Shabbos. Right? It poured that Shabbos. So we'll say, so remember, interestingly enough, listen to this case. You're walking home from shul, you step in a puddle. Inadvertently, you step in a puddle. So now what happens? Your socks are soaked. So we'll say, So is there an issue with walking in soaked socks on Shabbos? Because think about this for just a moment. What happens every single time you take a step in soaked socks? You're soaked the water, right? You're soaked the water. So ask the Archel Shabbos, listen to this. Let's say somebody's socks got soaked, just again by normal manner of walking. So he says, you can keep walking. You can keep walking even though the water does get pressed out of your socks, is extracted, it's pushed out of your socks with every step you take. So we'll say this is very interesting. So in other words, I'm not mechuyev to go ahead and sit down on the ground and take off my socks as I'm walking home from shul. But once I do get home from shul, I am obligated to change my socks as quickly as possible. But let's say if you skip down a little bit, he says the same idea. Actually, let's look at Sam Gimel. Shatiach shenirtov v'kasher darchim al gabav nischatim mimenu hamayim al haaretz b'bechol zimna. But let's say, or another similar case to this, a rug that is wet, and every single time you step on it, liquid comes out. So we'll say this happens all the time. Where does it happen especially? So we'll say, again, in shul, even in shul, right, when it rains, we have a mat that we put out. If it's really pouring outside, so that mat becomes saturated, and after enough time, when you walk into shul and you step down on it, you could see the water coming up from it. So am I permitted to go ahead and step on a mat like that on Shabbos? So Archa Shabbos Paskins that halacha l'maisa mutter min adim lahalech al gabav b'mikra shef shali marim. So we'll say, of course, if I can avoid it, in other words, if I don't have to step on the mat, that's fine. But most of something, for example, we have a very slippery floor here. So the truth is, if you're coming in and your shoes are wet, to walk onto that floor, that linoleum floor, while it's wet, you could slip. So it's good to kind of step on that mat first. So if you don't have to step on the mat, don't step on the mat. But lamaisa, if you need to, it's not a problem. I will say, so these cases are kind of the same. The wet socks, the wet mat. Why is it not a problem of kibus? So look what he writes in the footnote. Ubetam hadavar efshar debetzir zeh. Still in number 5, just a footnote. Debetzir zeh ein chashivus malacha schita klal dimbanu lado mishum meleches mefarek hare ein lo shum shimush b'mayim ha'elu ve'im holchem le'ibod o chozer v'nivlam begarav. So listen to this. Let's work backwards. So remember, whenever it comes to squeezing out liquids, we have 2 possible issues. Issue number 1 is mefarek. Is this a case of mefarek, Rabosai? It's a case of mefarek, Dosh? No, why not? I don't want the liquid. Right? Rabosai, by the way, it's even better. It's actually even better. Not only do I not want the liquid, but Rabosai, what happens to the liquid as soon as it's extracted? It gets reabsorbed. So there's no mefarek. Okay, so is it mechabes? He says, furthermore, v'imbaru lodo mishum melaches melaben, which is mechabes, after she'in derech libun bakach, kevan shamayim chozim v'nivlan begar above. So essentially, Archos Shabbos says, in both of these cases, the socks and the wet rug, it's not going to be a problem for one simple reason, which is the liquid is getting reabsorbed into the sock or into the rug. So that's not mefarek, because mefarek, again, I want the liquid, and it's not mechabes, because I will say, remember again, schita, when it comes to the malach of mechabes, is extracting the liquid so that it's no longer absorbed in the item. But in this case, because it is getting reabsorbed in the item, halacha l'maisa, it is not a problem. Good. But say, obviously, even though it's not a problem, we saw Archos Shabbos says when you get home, change your socks. If you don't have to step on that rug, don't step on the rug. But l'maisa, one does not transgress if when one walks in the socks or when one goes in and walks on the rug. So we'll say, this now leads us, it's always interesting to see in halacha what becomes sometimes the most riveting topics. Shabbos say, one of the most riveting topics in the malach of Mechabes, get ready, hold on to your seats, baby wipes. Baby wipes. Is one permitted to go ahead and use baby wipes on Shabbos or not? On Shabbos, it's incredible. So we'll say it's actually incredibly exciting. So listen to this. So Archos Shabbos, we'll say, so we're going to begin. This is the stuff of major machlokes. So watch this. Archos Shabbos. Also, lishtam shapachos lachos almanas lanakos tinok olam atar achar shub isur schita. Archo Shabbos is pretty unequivocal. It is asur to use baby wipes on Shabbos. Asur to use baby wipes on Shabbos, right? You have a wipe that has liquid in it. When you use it, you extract the liquid. And I will say, by the way, here's what's interesting. Now, using the baby wipe on Shabbos would be what kind of problem? What would it be? So it's schita, but schita als what? Is it Melaben? It's not Melaben, right? It's not really Melaben. So it could very well be dash, right? It's mefarik. It's mefarik. And by the way, it's even stronger over here because remember, you want the liquid that is coming from that wipe, right? You want that. That's part of the job. Otherwise, you would just use a tissue, right? Why do people use a baby wipe instead of a tissue? Because I want the liquid absorbed in the wipe. So therefore, Archo Shabbos says, so we'll say, whereas this might not be an issue of mechabes, this is absolutely an issue of mefarik, of dash, of squeezing the liquid absorbed into something, ultimately again because you want the liquid. Minchas Yitzchak in number 7 agrees with the Archo Shabbos as well. Imuter l'shtavo Shabbos, this is great. We'll say, B'niyaros Retuvim Hanikruim Baby Vipes. Baby vibes, also Hebrew. So again, the Minchas Yitzchak goes on, it's actually a much longer tshuva, but he paskins that halacha l'maisa, it's asr. So Minchas Yitzchak says, so how should I clean my baby on Shabbos? He says it's very simple. Use a little spray bottle of water and a tissue, and you're good to go. In other words, I will say, remember, the issue over here is not using liquid. The issue over here is extracting liquid from that is absorbed in a wipe. So therefore, he says, just use a little spritz bottle, go ahead and use a tissue afterwards, and you're good to go. So I will say, we have the Archo Shabbos, the Minchas Yitzchak, and many others who just flat out answer the use of a baby wipe. Okay, now we come to the matirs. Here's what's interesting. So the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos writes, number 8 as follows. The Rambam writes, Hadosh. So I will say, remember again, any malacha on Shabbos has a shear, right? In other words, you're only chayiv, you're not just chayiv if you perform an act. You're only chayiv if you perform an act of a certain, and the act almost has like a quantity to it. For example, I will say, if you go ahead and you carry out a strand of hair, you pluck a strand of hair, well, don't pluck it on Shabbos, but let's say, before Shabbos I have a strand of hair, and I carry out the strand of hair from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, my chayiv parotza? No, because there's a shear for otza, grogeres, kechatzi grogeres. The point is, there's a shear. So we'll say, so let's talk. So it says the Rambam, when it comes to the malacha of schita vis-a-vis dash, right? So when it comes to extracting something which is absorbed, which is a derivative not of machabes right now, but of dash, of threshing, how much do you have to extract in order to be chayiv? So writes the Rambam, hadosh ki grogeres chayiv. If you go and extract the amount of liquid that is the size of a grogeres, or the volume of a grogeres, of a dried fig, you're chayiv. Ve'ein disha ela b'gidulei karka. Furthermore, the malacha of dash, of extracting something which is absorbed in something else, only applies to something that grows from the ground. V'hamefarek, harei, he told us, hadash v'chayiv. So we'll say, this is incredibly important. So the Rambam says, in order to go ahead and be over on the malacha of mefarek, right, of schita, of extracting something which is absorbed into something else, you need 2 criteria. You need, number 1, a quantity. What's the quantity? The amount of a grogeres. Number 2, the malacha of dash, of mefarek, only applies to things which grow from the ground. But if something is synthetic, it is not subject to the malacha of dash. And I will say, using that logic, according to the Rambam, is there a problem with using a baby wipe on Shabbos? No, not at all. Number 1, because you can't extract the amount of moisture the size of a grogeres from it. That's number 1, right? Think about a fig, right? You can't extract that amount of liquid. And number 2, most times baby wipes are made from synthetic material. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, there would not really be a problem according to the Rambam. And in fact, if you take a look at Shmir Shabbos says as follows. He says, Yesh makom lahakel ulekaneach tinok ulenage ves hapanim al hayadayim b'mat chotos lochos ve'lo asus minyar v'lo beged. So Shmir Shabbos says there's room to be made to allow the use of baby wipes. I will say whatever you're using baby wipe for, whether you're using to clean the baby after the baby had a dirty diaper, or you're cleaning hands or a face, it doesn't really matter. So Shmir Shabbos Kilchos says that halacha l'maisa, there's room to say that you should be able to use the baby wipe. Now, he gives a very important qualification here. This is assuming that it's made from niyar, from paper, and not from a garment, right? The Rebbe said this is incredibly important because remember, again, this goes back to what we learned last week. Remember, again, Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, Rav Moshe, very makel in general with schita vis-a-vis paper products, right? Because again, disposables, one-time use things they feel are ultimately, again, not really subject to the issue of mechabes. So therefore, the baby wipe would have to be, again, niyar, type of throwaway material. However, Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa writes, "Ubilvad shelo yischot biadayim es hamachta va'af lo yikanech b'chozek." However, you cannot squeeze the wipe biadayim, right? You can't actively squeeze out the moisture from it, which makes sense. No one's going to say you can actively squeeze out the moisture, and you shouldn't wipe it. You shouldn't use it too hard. I was about to say, so the idea is you can't squeeze it, and you also can't use it too hard. In other words, when you use it, you have to use it in a way. We'll see what that means in just a moment, or why that is. But you have to use it gently. Here's what's interesting. What's really driving Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa is an understanding of baby wipe dynamics, right, or baby wipe mechanics, which is that really there's a layer of moisture that sits on top of the wipe, right? No, it's a layer of moisture, which also says why, even if you just touch the wipe, don't press down on it, your hand gets wet, right? There's a layer of moisture that sits on top of the wipe. So therefore, Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa says, therefore again, as long as halacha l'maisa, it's not made from a garment, right? It's not a beged, it's niyar. So number one, okay, niyar already is not such a big deal of schita. And furthermore, again, you don't really have to be silchit. In other words, you could just utilize the surface moisture and not utilize the moisture which is absorbed inside of the wipe. How so? Use the wipe gently. Use it gently, and if you use it gently, that's a pretty good assurance that Allah Chalamaytzu, you'll use the surface moisture, and you don't have to start getting into squeezing out the absorbed moisture. And I will say this becomes a theme. If you take a look at number 10, the Minchas Asher of Asher Weiss, here in a longer show, we're not going to do all of it, but we'll just do the first couple of lines of it. He says, Uma asa ulanias daiti alacha kimishna rishona tibibdikos rabo sharachti her'esi ladas the beshimush mikuba b'makbonim hamutzuyim kiyom bishok ein schita klal. So we'll say the Minchas Asher actually takes this even further. He says the way baby wipes are really made is that the overwhelming majority of moisture sits on top of the wipe and is not absorbed in the wipe. It's actually interesting the way he defines this as well. He says, because if the wipe is too saturated, then people say, think about this. What's the godless of baby wipes? What's the godless of it? The godless of it is that it's godless in everything. That it's moist enough to clean, but it's not too moist that you have to then bring something dry afterwards to go ahead and dry the baby. So the idea, so says the Minchas Asher, is incredible. The whole dynamic of the wipe is that it's supposed to be wet, but not too wet. How does it accomplish this amazing feat and task? By keeping the moisture on the surface, not absorbed into the wipe itself. I will say, remember again, is there any problem with the utilization of surface moisture? None at all. None at all. It's not a problem. Therefore, the Minchas Asher says, he goes on, he says, Ve'enikar hebdel klal bekamos hanozim. So he says, Ein schita klal. So what's that? It's a very strong statement. That's even stronger than Shmir Shabbos. Right? Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa said, right? Well, what was the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa's lashon? His lashon was, Yesh makom lahakel. Right? Yesh makom lahakel ulekaneach tinok. There's room to be makel. And Shmir Shabbos says, again, there's room to be makel. Just wipe gently. Minchas Asher, there is absolutely no problem with the use of baby wipes on Shabbos. Ein schita klal. Ve'ein nikar hevdel klal. Bekamos hanozam befurashos minat magbon. Bein nigov kal nigov rogil. Ve'af sha nigov nase ba'apolos lachatz mesuyim. And he says, it makes no difference if you use the wipe lightly, you use it vigorously, just clean the baby in the normal way. And he says, absolutely no problem with it on Shabbos. Sibas hadavar hi mishum shemagbonim eila miutzrim ba'ofen shanozal tofeach aleim ve'eno nivla bahem. So therefore, again, writes Minchas Asher, it is absolutely unequivocally permitted to use a baby wipe on Shabbos. And by the way, not only that, you can use it in a normal fashion. In other words, you don't have to say, I shouldn't wipe the baby too hard, it should be soft, I don't want to squeeze. He said you could use it in a normative fashion because halacha lamaisa, the moisture sits on top. He goes on, he develops this a little bit more. If we skip to the left-hand paragraph, he says, talks about that he did tests with a number of different baby wipes. If you look at the left, it says, B'shimush b'nei nigov kal, b'mishushan b'lachatz m'suyam, ki nigov tinok sheslach leich, ein hevda b'kamol sarozim b'furoshet mehem, v'im kein lo havi p'sik reisha. So we'll say, he gets into a whole discussion about p'sik reisha, which again, we're not going to get into. It's not really our topic. But suffice it to say, Rabosai, that the Minchas Asher says, even if worst case scenario, that you go ahead and you use the wipe a little too hard, and you go ahead and you end up actually extracting liquid, he says that's a davar she'eno miskabe. That is an unintended consequence. And with a davar she'eno miskabe, one is not chayiv. Again, I will say, remember just very quickly, the distinction between a psik reisha and a davar she'eno miskabe. Psik reisha is something which will inevitably occur. Davar she'eno miskabe means something which may occur. So what the Minchas Asher, his premise is, you could use the baby wipe on Shabbos in a way that doesn't extract absorbed moisture. And therefore, in the event that you're extracting absorbed moisture, that is a davar she'eno miskavein and not a psik reisha. And therefore, again, he ends off by saying, let's look at the last few lines. Therefore, again, Minchas Asher says, I believe you could use baby wipes on Shabbos for two reasons. Aleph, I'm almost positive that there really is no issue of schita, because the entire essence of use of a baby wipe ultimately, again, is for the surface moisture. And beis, mishkan schita davar she'eno miskavenu, the gam psikreshen kind. And even if you end up squeezing out some moisture, it's a davar she'eno miskaven. It's an unintended consequence, and ultimately, again, not a problem. I'll say earlier in the chub, he also said, and even if you end up going ahead and squeezing out some liquid, I'll say this is incredible. He says, or some moisture, it's not recognizable. Oh, Bosa, does that remind you of something? Does that remind you of something? This goes back to the Minchas Asher, Bosa, remember again by Klisha Malaktalis, or accelerometer, right? The Minchas Asher in general, the Shita also holds that Meleches Machsheves, in order to be in violation of Malach on Shabbos, you must do something that is quantifiable and recognizable, or what he called beneficial and recognizable. If it's not recognizable what you're doing, it's not a malacha. So what the Minchas Asher says is like this. It kind of goes on three levels. I really think there's no issue of schita at all, because the way the wipe works is you're really utilizing surface moisture. But even if you want to say that you may end, and therefore he said that you could use the wipe regularly. But even if you want to say that you're nervous, well, maybe you'll come to squeeze out some moisture. At most, it's a davar she'eno miskavein, right? It's unintended, and it's not even really recognizable. So because it's not even recognizable what you're doing, there's no real malacha involved. Say, Rabbi say again, you see a progression. So Shmir Shabbos was willing to say there's room to be makil if you use the baby wipe softly. Minchas Asher says it's unequivocally mutter, and halacha l'maisa you can use the baby wipe on Shabbos, and you can clean the baby in any normative way. Number 11, Ravad Yosef Yalkut Yosef writes, Yesh omrim shemuter lekaneach benachas tinok shas atzrachav b'mamchat halacha. So again, Ravad Yosef says that what? You could go ahead and clean the baby with a baby wipe, but use the wipe gently. So he writes, there is, like I mentioned before, there's all these associated issues. I will say one of the things you have to be careful with some of the baby wipes is that they're actually connected to each other. So I will say, so that is a problem on Shabbos of mechatech, right? Separating things which are connected, especially again, like same issue with using toilet paper on Shabbos, right? So I will say, so again, so he does say, if you're going to use baby wipes, you have to make sure that either they're not connected, they're not the kind that are connected, or if they are connected, separate them from each other before Shabbos. Toilets, so you can also wet toilet paper on Shabbos. So I'll say, remember again, toilet paper is not a problem, because remember, this goes back to Rav Moshe and Rav Shlomo Zalman from last week, which is that again, extracting liquid from paper, right, from paper products is not a problem of mechabes. Or extracting water from any throwaway item by one-time use item by definition is not a problem of kibus. But there are those who disagree. Shabbos say, again, I want to point out, like, I'm doing these a little bit out of order, but what you begin to see is you kind of, on one hand, have Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa and Ravavadja. And they essentially say, there is room to be megal. There's room to be megal. So again, both are saying that halacha l'maisa, use it gently, and use it gently. Ravavadja is even hedging his bets a little bit more, and he's saying, b'makom tzorech, if you really need it, meaning he prefers you to use wet toilet paper to clean the baby, or wet tissues, then he does for you to use a wipe. But makom tzorech, however you define makom tzorech, the baby has a very dirty diaper, or there is no toilet paper or tissues available. So makom tzorech, you could use the baby. So I just want to point out, Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa didn't say it. Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa felt comfortable telling us that as long as you're wiping gently, you're good to go. Ravavadja, if you can find an alternative, better to find an alternative, but if you can't, you can use it. And minchas asher, totally mutter. Rabbi said, look at this. In number 12, this is from the Sefer Rivavos Ephraim. Rav Ephraim Greenblatt, who was a Rav in Memphis for many years, and was a Talmud Mufak of Rav Moshe. Shabbos, listen to this. He quotes over here. This is a great tshuva. He says, "B'shalos tshuvas divrei chacham orachayim simishin tzadikav kosov the chacham echad shame agor Moshe finds in that psalm shekol minei baby wipes having mutter v'lo shayach schito mamela elo mishtamshem bazeh ein lehem ma'alachshosh." So some like to quote Rav Moshe that there is no problem with the use of baby wipes on Shabbos, right? Sounds like the Minchas Asher. Moshe. So first of all, again, I will say this is not a surprise, because remember again, Rav Moshe holds in general that when it comes to paper, right, throwaway items that are saturated with liquid, there's no problem of mechabes. Ve'im kein lefize mutter v'zoi tshuva mehav. He says v'zoi tshuva mehar beinoshim sheshalu balpeh. So listen to this. And Rivos Ephraim say, when the women always ask me the shaila, I always tell them the use of baby wipes is unequivocally mutter. And here's where it gets interesting. This is so beautiful. So I also listen to this. But there was another rabbi, he doesn't name who came out and said that no, Rav Moshe really held that baby wipes were usher. So Machlokes in Rav Moshe. Let's listen to this. Sir Greenblatt writes, he says, Anochi al mishmarti moda. I am standing by my post, right? I'm not recanting my position. Listen to how he ends. V'Hashem hatov yimcha li im shagisi. Hashem should forgive me if I am mistaken in this matter. In other words, so the Rivos Ephraim says, this is the Masorah I have from my Rebbe. And even though others quote my Rebbe in a different way, this is the Masorah I have from my Rebbe. I'm standing my ground. If I made a mistake, which is possible, who should forgive me for my mistake. Venira shadin nachal k'mosh. So this is great. So he says, if I made a mistake, Hashem should forgive me, but I'm right. Right? But I'm right. Which I will say is incredibly important, because think about this from a perspective of psak. Right? If you tell someone, here's the halacha, but Hashem should forgive me if I'm wrong, it doesn't exactly inspire the greatest amount of confidence. So on one hand, you need to be humble, right? If I'm wrong, but I'm right. Hashem should forgive me if I'm wrong, but I know that I'm right. So we'll say, so this is the machlokes when it comes to baby wipes. So again, so just to review a little bit, so we have a dramatic machlokes. On one hand, the Archel Shabbos, the Minchas Yitzchak, saying that use of big wipes on Shabbos unequivocally aser. Then we have really Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa and Ravavadja saying that there is room to be mekel. Ravavadja a bit more hesitant. You should only be mekel by using the wipe softly, but makom tzorech in a situation of need. Shmir Shabbos feeling very comfortable that if halach l'maisa using it softly, no problem to use it. And then we have Rav Moshe and the Minchas Asher, who paskin that halacha l'maisa, you could use baby wipes on Shabbos. So we'll say, how do we paskin halacha l'maisa? So you'll ask your own. There's a lot of different kilos, over here. But again, I think one could definitely feel absolutely comfortable relying on the piskei halacha of Rav Moshe and of the Minchas Asher, that the use of baby wipes on Shabbos is mutter. Now, obviously, if you could use it in a way with a little bit of a lighter use, so that again, one is not actively used. Because I'll say, what I do want to be clear on is everyone will agree that what? Taking a baby wipe, I don't think anyone does this, but taking a baby wipe and squeezing the moisture out of it will be asr. Right? So that everyone agrees with, whether it's Doraisa or D'Rabbanan, could be a discussion. Everyone will agree that will be asr. Maybe not according, again, that everyone will agree that should not be done on Shabbos. But barring that, between Rav Moshe and Minchas Asher, definitely one could rely on these opinions that the use of baby wipes should be permitted on Shabbos. Beautiful. Both sides. This now brings us to another discussion, a very exciting discussion. Let's take a look in the Shulchan Aruch. And I apologize for those of you who are using the copies of the Shulchan Aruch. I'm sorry. I don't know why I printed 2 pages on one. It came out very small. But again, we'll hopefully be able to follow along. So so now we're taking a look. Siman Shin Beis, Sif Beis. A very interesting case. Halokate Yabulos Sha'al Gabi Begadim. So we'll say what they're referring to over here is one who goes ahead and will say Yabulos. You know what a Yabeles is? You've seen that term before in Gemara. See, Yabeles means a wart, right? A wart or a growth. So we'll say, so what does it mean to peel a Yabeles off an article of clothing? It refers to I don't know what the technical term is. You know, like when you get balls of fabric. Pills. Good. Halokech Yabulos Sha'al Gabi Begadim. If you, a lot of excitement about that, good, right? If you go ahead and de-pill your garments, right? I don't know if that's a word, but you go ahead and take the little balls of fabric off. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, Kigon ila yavol shebiklei tzemer hanishar min hariga. For example, it was common after you would make a woolen garment that there would be some pills, right? Some woolen pills that will be left on the garment. If you remove that from the garment, Rabbi say, and Shabbos, listen to this, is wild. Mishum makeh bepatish. It's also because of makeh bepatish. So this is now a new discussion, right? So we're leaving mechabes a little bit. We're leaving mechabes, and I can also say to makeh bepatish. Now the truth is we're going to learn makeh bepatish as well as a separate standalone malacha. But makeh bepatish, suffice it to say, means performing a concluding act of malacha on Shabbos, or performing any act which kind of, we'll call it, solidifies, cements, or completes a utensil. So if you are making a woolen garment, it's common for the woolen garment to have pills on it. The act of removing the pills from the garment is asr on Shabbos because that is makeh bepatish. That is, so to speak, delivering the final hammer blow, going ahead and completing the garment. V'hu sheyakbid aleihem. But this is only if you're makbid on it. Aval im hisiram derech esek pater. But if we'll say if you were kind of just not paying attention and remove the pills from the garment, then ultimately, again, one would not be chayyeh for that. So we'll say, let's analyze a little bit. A really fascinating halacha. So first of all, if you take a look at the Ber Halacha number 14, so we'll say, so again, the act of depilling your garment on Shabbos is makeh bepatish, and therefore will be asr. The Ber Halacha has an interesting discussion over here. It's Ber Halacha Divrei Maschil Halokate Yabulos. On the right-hand side. Sikotum in the Prima Gadim. Ha Prima Gadim nistape idafka kishelokate kali yabulos yesham or afidu biabelas echad chayav ashnesha shabbat. So we'll say it's an interesting question. Is it makeh bepatish only if you remove all of the pills? Or is it makeh bepatish even if you remove one of the pills? We'll say it's an interesting shaila, no? Because one could make the argument that the act of makeh bepatish, right? When is the garment truly complete? When it's depilled. But Lamaisa, if you just, interested the Ber Halacha paskins, that even the act of removing one pill is a problem of makeh bepatish. So we'll say what's very interesting is, essentially the Ber Halacha says, is we look at the action. And the action itself of removing the pills from a woolen garment is an act of completion, even if the garment is not fully completed. So the Ber Halacha actually paskins that even removing one of the pills, even though there might be 500 other ones still left, ultimately, it'll probably be a problem of makeh bepatish. Now, I will say now, I want to point out something very interesting. The halacha, as stated in the Shulchan Aruch, does not really apply to us all that much, and I'll tell you why. Because the way the Shulchan Aruch is framing this, I will say, is this is not a new garment. The way they used to make their woolen garments was it was common for there to be pills on the woolen garment when it was new. So the act of removing, depilling the garment was makeh bepatish. The Rebbe says it's interesting, brought down in the Sefer Lamites Malachas, depilling your old garment is not makeh bepatish. It's only makeh bepatish if you go ahead and you remove it from, which makes sense, right? Makeh bepatish is the completion of something new, the final hammer blow. So I will say, it must be just a difference in wool technology. I don't believe you find this on today's woolen garments, right? I will say generally our garments become pilly as they get older. But by Pashas, when you buy a brand new sweater, right? You buy a brand new woolen sweater, so there's no pills on it, right? There might be a little bit of fabric that's sticking up, but there are no pills on it. So, and again, I want to point out, depilling your old garment is not a problem, makeh bepatish. That's not right, because again, remember that garment is already old. So, but yet there are some other very interesting halacha l'maaseh ramifications of this. Take a look at number 15. So Shmir Shabbos Kilchus writes as follows. He says, "Asr lahasir chute hakliva shenishru bebegadim chadashim." Also, listen to this case. Mazel tov, you got a new suit, and what happens? You come right, you put it on at Shabbos, you're all excited. You go to put something in your pocket, and you realize your pocket is stitched. Can you unstitch pockets on Shabbos? And the answer is no, because Rabbosai, essentially the act of unstitching your pockets or the vent. The vent of your jacket, of your jacket, that is makeh bepatish. And I will say, what I want to point out is, that is true. See, people sometimes think that the only problem is, if your pockets are sewn shut, there are two ways you could do it, right? You could just rip it open, or again, you could also pull out the thread, right? The thread, you can actually pull it out. Either way is awesome. Right, the act of removing that last piece, that will be makeh bepatish. So I will say that's the end again. That halacha. So the opening up of our stitched pockets is the same thing of the depilling of the woolen garment of the Shulchan Aruch. I will say brings down another fascinating application of this. He goes on to look at the last underlined part, number 15. The asher limchok mi begadim chadashim simane gir shenirshmu aleim b'shas. I will say this is incredible. Listen to this. What about I bring home my suit from the tailor, and I realize I took it for alterations. There's some chalk left on the pants or on the jacket. You are not permitted to brush that off on Shabbos. Shmir Shabbos Kilchus Paskins, because he says, you might think, that's mechika, that's erasing. No, he says it's makeh bepatish. Because again, it's common when you get a garment back from alterations, that there's some chalk left on it, right? So the act of brushing off your garment, right before you wear it, or when you wear it for the first time, is part of the completion of the garment. So both the unstitching of the pockets or the vents, right, or wiping off chalk from the garment will halacha l'maaseh be problematic on Shabbos, als makeh bepatish. Another interesting example is we'll say, this is a very common case. Shmir Shabbos Kilchus writes as follows. Simani machbesat furim b'kavasim. Asr la'asiram. The gam ein lahasir tzeviyos and we'll say, what about tags? What about tags left on your clothing? So there are two cases that come up. Case number one is a price tag, and case number two is a dry cleaning tag. Can you take, can you take these tags off on Shabbos? So here's what's interesting. If you look at number 16, so the Shmir Shabbos Kilchus writes, Simani mechbesat furim b'kavasim asr la'asiram. He says dry cleaning tags, which are sewn into the garment, cannot be removed on Shabbos. Now, this may or may not be an issue of makeh bepatish. This may just be an issue, ultimately, again, of removing something which is sewn in, right? So again, either way, I want to point out, he's not referring to our type of dry cleaning tags, right? He's referring to something that is sewn into, you have this a lot in the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, where often they're using like a laundry company. They'll often sew in your information into the garment or into the suit. So that's what he's referring to over here, where the actual dry cleaning information is sewn in. You can't take it on Shabbos. So we'll come back. So what about a dry cleaning tag like we have, right? Which is often, I think, right? It's just stapled. Can you remove that on Shabbos? And the answer is yes, but. The but is, you must be careful to avoid ripping lettering. As well as remember again, there is writing on that tag. So as long as you can rip off that tag in a way that does not obliterate any lettering, it'll be absolutely mutter on Shabbos. What about a price tag? What about if halacha l'maisa you bought into an article of clothing and you forgot the price tag on the clothing? Can a price tag be removed on Shabbos? So Shmir Shabbos Kilchus writes as follows. He says, what about v'gam ein lahasir taviot samechir osuga svar kidomat furos umudubakos b'divrei halabosha chadashim. So he says, if the price tag is like sewn in, or really like maybe even like tape pasted on, right? Pasted with an adhesive, you can't remove that on Shabbos. But for example, what happens if the price tag is just attached to the garment with, let's say, a ring of plastic? Like is often the case, ring of plastic. Plastic, then it is permitted. In this halacha l'maisa, so one is permitted to go ahead and remove tags on Shabbos, whether it is a dry cleaning tag or a price tag, as long as halacha l'maisa it's not sewn into the garment. Shabbos say, so again, and with the price tag, again, one has to be careful with not obliterating letters. And I also just want to point out, halacha l'maisa, you can even take a scissor and cut the tag. Again, ideally the post can bring down, maybe better to go ahead and use a knife. So if you could use a knife, again, we'll get these border on different halachas, which we'll get to. So if you could use a knife, better to use a knife. But if you can't go ahead and find a knife, you could use a scissor to cut it. So I'll say, so again, you could tear it off also. But again, with tearing, one just has to be careful that one doesn't end up chas v'shalom tearing the garment, which could end up being ultimately other issues of kriya or korea, I should say, or of tearing other lettering on the garment. But again, point over here is you're allowed to remove the tags as long as they are not sewn on. Piskei Teshuvos writes in number 70, another interesting application of this. He says, Aval davar harogil hiskalkel ubetikuno ein mishum shar yisurim kibona kosher ein bo mishum makeh bepatish. Shabbos said this is very interesting. The concept of makeh bepatish. Shabbos said, let me give you a good example. Let's say again you have a hat. Right? And over the course of Shabbos, your hat gets smushed. So now what do you want to do? You want to go ahead and push out your hat, right? Push out the crown of the hat. Or maybe you want to go ahead and reset the indentations by the hat. Hold on a second. That's an act of makeh b'patish. Because how is a hat made? Right? The crown is fashioned, right? The indentations are smoothed over. So isn't fixing that on Shabbos makeh b'patish? So the Piskei Teshuvos writes something very interesting over here. He says, something that is ruined and then realigned, that's not called makeh b'patish. So I will say makeh b'patish is a very specific act that essentially occurs how often? Once. Which makes sense, right? So makeh b'patish is the final hammer blow, is finishing, completing the garment. But so Piskei Teshuvos says that if you have a davar haragil hiskalkel, if you have something which often gets ruined, so a hat is a good example. It's common, right, that you put your hat down on the coat room on Shabbos, you put it down on the table, your kids get a hold of it, whatever it is, it gets pushed in over here, smushed over here. So it's common that it gets smushed and then fixed. That's not called makeh b'patish. And therefore that would be permitted on Shabbos. He says, Kigon kova shenis kamet, mutter liyashro, v'o yishom shebekilim chadash yishom mishum makeh b'patish, bo sepula siyum hakli, Gam kisheroi l'shtamish bekli below pu'ulazu mashikim bekli mishumash sheniskalkal mimaskonto haroi kol sharai roi l'shmusha b'yavskun. So once he goes, he defines rest not kind of to get this. V'gam ato, he points out over here as follows: that halacha l'maisa makeh b'patish again is only an issue when the kli halacha l'maisa is being completed for the first time. Now he points out something very interesting. You still are in violation of makeh b'patish, even if what? Even if halacha l'maisa, the kli was usable without this final hammer blow. And the proof is in the halacha and Shulchan Aruch, right? The sweater is perfectly usable, even though what? It's pilly, right? So halacha l'maisa, makeh b'patish doesn't mean that the object wasn't usable, and now suddenly I make it usable. But even if the item was totally usable, but this is a normal concluding act, that is a problem of makeh b'patish. He goes on, Masha'ekim bekli mashumash sheniskalkel mimaskenusa haroi kol shadai roi l'shtamish bo k'fi Yehudo Rosh la'amida b'chono. I'll say this stands in contradistinction to, let's say, a kli that was already fashioned, already finished, then got ruined, but it's still usable. There's no problem with fixing it again, right? That was the hat case that we gave. So once again, it's very important to show something cannot be subject to makeh b'patish if it was already a completed utensil. In other words, you're only subject to makeh b'patish once in your kli life. Once you were subject to makeh b'patish, you were completed, you're no longer subject to makeh b'patish again. V'gam ata fine. So we'll say, so just another couple of examples of this. I mentioned this before, the Sefer Lamites Malachos, which is the Rabbi Ribiat books, right? The multi-volume Rabbi Ribiat books, the 39 Malachos books. He brings down this idea that you could remove lint balls, right? Or pills from an old sweater. That is not a problem. The Shulchan Aruch's case is the removal of the pills from a new garment, because that was considered to be ultimately, again, makeh b'patish. So we'll say, because again, restoring something to its former form is mutar on Shabbos. That is not a din of makeh b'patish. Right? We'll say, well, we'll stop over here for tonight. Just, how much do we have left? No, all right. We'll have to say, I was hoping to finish up Siman Shin Beis Emeretz Hashem this evening, but we'll leave this last topic of folding clothing, which is a really riveting topic, Emeretz Hashem, which is also end of Siman Shin Beis. Again, nothing to do with Melaben Mechabe. So I'll say, but maybe just to end off with a little bit of hashkaf on this, because I will say, here's what's interesting. What you begin to see is that the malach of makeh b'patish only applies once. Why? Because once a utensil has been completed, then essentially what happens? It forever retains its shem kli, right? That utensil status. So we'll say, so the hat, right? Once it's been finished, somebody sits on it. It's still called that. It's still called the kli. No problem with reshaping the crown and the indentations. Which I will say, such a profound yesod for us as well, because Adam nimshal lekli, man is a utensil, right? We make many references to this in the Yamim Noraim davening. Hari ani lefanecha kechli malebusho chlima. And also, you know what the incredible part is? Man is like a kli. And why this is important is because we had our makeh b'patish, right? The Moshe fashioned us. He made us. We are completed kelim, which tells us that even if we get sat on, right? And even if we mess up, and even if we destroy the kli, and even if we make many wrong turns, and many missteps and mistakes, the chalos shem kli, my identity as a completed utensil, never leaves me. It always remains with me. I may get dented here. I may get a little pilly over there. I may get sat on over here. I may even be destroyed over there. But lamaisa, my identity as a utensil always remains. And this, of course, gives us the ultimate hope for tshuva. Sometimes we think we're beyond repair because we've lost our identity as a kli. But it's not true. No matter how much I mess up, I always retain my makeh b'patish, always retain my kli identity, which tells me that I always have the koach to start again, to begin anew, and just to put in effort to rebuild myself to the best of my ability. So we'll stop over here for tonight. Will Emirat Hashem continue? Obviously, no shir this coming week for the Shavuos. So also, I just want to mention one last thing. It's kedai. If you are looking to learn something over Shavuos, I'll make a suggestion. Review Hilchos Muktzah. Because I will say, what would be a real avon, what would be a terrible tragedy, is as we go through this, to lose out on the limud from the past. Because we had muktzah on our fingertips. We have a couple of hours, Shavuos night, we'll be having a shir as well. But to use the opportunity to chazor b'hilchos muktzah, we should become proficient and maintain our proficiency in all the areas of halacha. Shkach Avosai, we'll stop here.